Hi, welcome back to the channel and another review today, carrying on my Nightmare on Elm Street series, this time with part 2, Freddy's Revenge. And this movie came out in 1985, just 1 year after the original film came out. Obviously that was such a big success, they were definitely going to get a sequel straight into the works. But Wes Craven did not come back to direct this film. They got another person who was also working on the original project in other roles, a guy called Jack Shoulder. So he came in to direct this movie. And this is one that at the time was very negatively reviewed, and even today is still talked about as being one of the worst in the franchise. And whilst I could definitely understand, being back then, you know, how good that first movie was, I could imagine watching this for the first time and being so disappointed by it. Such a huge tonal shift, such a bizarre movie, and definitely a big step down from the original. But I do think now that going back to it, knowing, you know, the kind of reputation that it has as a movie, I actually think there's quite a lot to enjoy about it. It's definitely one of the weirder and more interesting films in the franchise, I think. So it's definitely still worth going to give this one a watch, but it's definitely not up to that quality of the original, I don't think. But getting into the story here, you've basically got a fresh cast of characters. This time you're following the lead character, Jesse, a guy who has just moved into the house that Nancy used to live in on Elm Street. And he is being terrorised by Freddy Krueger in his dreams, and Freddy wants to possess him in order to get Jesse to kill alongside him in the real world. So that's just set up for your story here. And I think one of the biggest issues with this movie overall, other than the fact that tonally it's just so much different from the original, is that all of the internal logic is kind of out the window here. I think if you're one of those kind of people that notices problems with the script not making sense, I mean, there was even a little bit of that in the original, I think, where if you look at the final half an hour, whether things are a dream or not, some of the rules are inconsistent, you know, and here, any kind of rules and logic go way out the window. Basically in this film and all of the sequels after this, to be honest, they're all guilty of that, but particularly this one, there's so many scenes throughout this movie where by the end you'll have no idea whether that happened in a dream, whether it's real life, was it a vision, whose perspective were you watching from. So it's all over the place in that regard, and it makes for a very messy film, and that's definitely one of the biggest problems with it, I think. But that being said, it's very entertaining. It's one of those movies where even though the script is actually quite poor, the individual scenes themselves are quite good. And part of that is the fact that they are so quirky and so strange, that they just have a bit of a charm about them. There's definitely still a lot of the scares from the first one. I would say after the second one, there's a step down in how scary they are. But in this one, I think Freddy Krueger himself, Robert Englund's performance as Freddy, he's probably the scariest in this movie. There's something about him, that the makeup design in this one, he really looks really freaky. Some really interesting dream sequences, and I think kind of utilising Freddy in the best way. I quite like all of that stuff, so it definitely is interesting to watch. And the movie actually opens with what I think is the best scene of the film. So you get this kind of opening, which is your intro dream sequence, as we always get in the Elm Street movies. And you have this character, Jesse, played by Mark Patton, who gets onto the school bus, and they're taking these bunch of kids to school, and suddenly the bus starts really speeding up, drives out over into this like wasteland, like desert kind of area. I don't know where this is set in the US, but into this wasteland, and it just drives out at full speed into the middle of nowhere. And it turns out that Freddy Krueger is the one driving this bus. And I remember seeing this when I was quite young, probably 12 or 13, just after I'd seen the original. And this was the scene that had always stuck with me. And I still think now it's really quite an impressive scene. Just like visually, it looks really cool. You know, just the way Freddy is used in this scene, all the kids kind of going crazy on this bus, just the setting, the look of it all. There's something quite weird and unsettling about it. And I definitely think it's a great intro to the movie. It's a really cracking opening scene. So there's a number of good scenes like that throughout this film, whether or not they make sense or not. There's other cool stuff like this. You've got the pool scene as well, where Freddy turns up and basically massacres a bunch of these teenagers at a pool party, which is really wild to watch. Yes, there's a lot of good stuff here, and I do actually quite like the lead character as well. It's obviously a bit different, the fact that the character that would go on to fight the demon at this time usually would be a woman, this time using a guy. Definitely something a little bit different and interesting to go along with this character. Now, obviously, one of the most talked about things with this movie is all of the gay commentary and subtext that the screenwriter decided to put into this movie. And I think that is something that does make it interesting, but I definitely think they could have done something a lot more effective with it. You know, if you watch the documentary, the Never Sleep Again documentary, you'll see that half of the actors, filmmakers, everybody involved claim to not have realised that that is what they were doing. I mean, I know they say in the 80s it was more innocent times, but I'm sorry, you know, the scene with the coach being dragged off by Freddy to the boys' locker room and stripped down and towel whipped to death. The idea of when they were filming that they were just all completely oblivious to this kind of commentary that was going on in there just seems absolutely ridiculous to me. I find that very hard to believe. But I think because not everybody was on board with what they were doing this, or they weren't in the know about them trying to put this little extra theme in there as well, the message ends up coming off quite confused. You know, it'd be quite a good idea to have this as like a metaphor for sort of the difficulties of coming out at that age, at the time, in the 80s as well. But the ending of the movie kind of undoes a lot of that, because Jesse overcoming his fight with Freddy is also him coming back to his girlfriend and just being like, no, that was just a weird thing going on. I'm actually the straight guy. So I think there's definitely something a little bit confusing about the messaging when you look at that, and I'm sure that's because you had different writers, different people involved in making this movie that were all on different pages. So, but yeah, I think in terms of the messaging, it isn't particularly concise and you know, clear in what they were actually trying to say with that. Speaking about the kills and the effects, a lot of the stuff is really creative in here, and the fact that it does look a bit strange as well, I think actually kind of gives it that creepier element. You know, where Freddy actually ends up breaking out of Jesse's body, you know, where he actually kind of tears him apart from the inside and comes out. It's a really grotesque scene, and even though when you look at it now, it looks a little bit weird. You can see like Jesse's face, it definitely looks like a big plasticine model, but there's still something a bit unnerving about it. It's still a little bit weird and creepy to look at. And I just think, again, Robert Englund's performance around that really adds to the whole scene as well. Again, a lesser actor would not have brought this same thing to it. So there's some really kind of cool stuff like that, and it seems like that throughout the movie. That just keep the whole thing so entertaining to watch. And that for me is why I would still give the movie a positive review and would advise that you still give this one a go, because I do think even though there is a lot of bizarre stuff and there's a lot of weird stuff, I think if you try hard not to compare it to the original and just kind of watch it as its own strange little thing, you will actually get some enjoyment out of this movie, because it's only short. It's probably about an hour and a half. It just flies by for me. So it's actually a half decent movie, I would say, despite its numerous problems. You know, once again at the end, they do have that kind of rush scene, a lot like the original, where, you know, they overcome, they defeat Freddy, but of course you have to set up another sequel, so there's one final scare in the final moments of the film. And again, they don't really, I've never felt with the Elm Street films, they know how to handle these endings. It comes across to me as being really rushed, you know, where the actors are all kind of talking in a very contrived way. There's something just a little bit off-putting about it. You know, you've got the girl on the bus, the friend of the Meryl Streep lookalike, and she's like, oh, everything's all going to be okay. We're all and then suddenly the hand comes out. It's just, yeah, it doesn't really work, I don't think. I think they could have, you know, fair enough if you want to have the final twist to show you that there is going to be a sequel, that's fine, but I just don't think they knew how to execute those scenes particularly well. So I definitely don't think this is one of the worst Elm Street films from memory. I haven't seen them in a few years now, and I'm still currently making my way through all of the franchise, so For me, it wouldn't be at the bottom. I think there's a number of films that are far worse than this in the Elm Street franchise. So this one is definitely worth your time to check out and give it a go. Because I do think it is an interesting movie and quite an enjoyable watch. So I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 5 rating. So please do leave your thoughts down in the comments below of what you think of Freddy's Revenge if you've seen it. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.